All right, let's talk about Dr. Fauci.
Yes, Dr. Fauci he was deposed to give a 7-hour deposition in the lawsuit brought by the attorneys general of the states of Louisiana and Missouri. The lawsuit accuses high-ranking government officials of working with social media companies under the guise of combating misinformation in order to achieve greater censorship. Dr. Fauci is a named defendant. I'm not clear if he is defending himself with his own personal lawyers. I don't think that's the case. I'm pretty sure you and I are footing his his legal bills on this. But that is something to be looked into. Now, the deposition was done in late November, but as of today, we got our hands on a copy of the 446-page deposition, and it does make for some interesting reading. We're going to show you some highlights, but first we wanted to show you Attorney General Schmidt, who is one of the attorneys generals who is bringing this case, because he talked about his hot take on the deposition on Fox News last night.
Well, for a guy that proclaimed to be he was the science and this all-knowing being, it turns out his middle name was I don't recall. So we got a lot of that. We got a lot of that in the 7 hours, but we were able to extract, I think, some really important information. First, the lab leak. He was very well aware that this was a credible theory, much more credible than what he landed on, but they immediately went, I think because they knew they were exposed because his agency was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, went to discredit that and label anybody that came out with that just weeks later as a conspiracy theorist. Secondly, as far as the response, Fauci sends, along with the World Health Organization delegation, his chief lieutenant, Dr. Lane, to go there, and they witness these really extreme measures, these lockdowns that China was imposing, and they praised it. And Fauci was completely on board with that. And who knows what we might have ended up with even more extreme measures, but he was certainly on board with that and confirmed that in his deposition. And then thirdly, as relates to masks, a friend actually emails him in February of 2020 asking him if she should wear a mask on a plane. And he says, basically, masks are ineffective. Later on March 31st, there's some emails with more studies to confirm that. Then on April 3rd, he does an about face and says, masks are completely necessary. Mandates follow, lives are ruined, and COVID tyranny is born. What's clear from this depo, Laura, is that when Fauci speaks, big tech censors, and that's what this lawsuit's all about.
Okay.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So he does say, I don't recall, a lot. I think somebody counted up
174 times, I think.
And yeah. I don't have a huge problem with that because that's how you're trained to talk when you go to a deposition. Your lawyers prep you for it. If there's anything even remotely incriminating that come out of this, you just have the right to say, I don't recall. There are several times when he's asked about things and I'm like, he's like, that's not my job. I don't do that. I didn't know about this. For instance, when he's asked about gain-of-function research, and he says, and it was noted that there was an exception to a ban on gain-of-function research, which was put in place, I believe, in 2005. I'd have to double check. But there were research projects that received those exceptions. And he's asked about that. And he says, I didn't approve that exception. That doesn't really get to me. I don't do that. And I'm like, don't you? Wouldn't you know? Because that's kind of important, right?
Right.
If you're making an exception to something that there is a ban on because it's so critical that it be done in certain circumstances, shouldn't you know when it's...
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem I have with this. I do have a problem with the I don't recall as an answer because you are the highest paid federal employee in the United States government.
But he's playing a game, though.
He's the head of the COVID task force. He was the head of our COVID response. But millions
deposition
of people's
is
lives.
A dangerous
You don't
game.
remember? You just don't recall?
I don't think he does. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying he's playing the game of deposition the way it's supposed to be played.
By lawyers.
Yes, by lawyers. But this is interesting. Now, he's asked about social media a lot, and his argument is, I don't know, I don't use social media, I don't really get it, I don't have a Twitter, I don't have a Facebook, I'm not in touch with this newfangled high-tech thing that the kids do. So then he's asked, let's look at this. Well, let's go to the middle. Did you know anyone who works for a social media platform? He says, do I know someone who works for a social media platform? Or at this time. He says, I've had communications with Mark Zuckerberg in the past, who was, I've done, I believe, 3 outward FaceTime discussions encouraging people to get vaccinated. Okay, questionnaire. Do you know anyone else who works for social media platform other than Mark Zuckerberg? When you say, do I know someone who works with, they clarify, like, do you have acquaintances, people you know who work at social media platforms? He says, well, a person who used to work as a, next slide, please, as a software engineer for Twitter was my daughter. And he says, oh, your daughter works for Twitter? She used to, yes. And he goes on, when did she stop? A year ago. Okay, so Fauci had a daughter working at Twitter all this time. I didn't know that. I don't think most of us did. Software engineer, okay, that's interesting.
Was she instrumental in creating the backdoor software portal that government could censor COVID content and suppression?
I'm not at all sure that does not make her now open to deposition. If your dad is Dr. Fauci and you worked at Twitter, and Twitter social media is at the heart of this litigation,
of course.
It looks like even the questionnaire was like, wait, your daughter works for Twitter? Like, they did not know this. And I don't think that most people did. Now, this next one, I can't wrap my head around it. You help me. Take a look at how chummy Fauci seems to be with Mark Zuckerberg. He says, the questionnaire says, is this an email to you from Mark Zuckerberg? Correct. The top one's dated February 27th, 2020. Right. He writes to you, Tony, I was glad to hear your statement about the COVID-19 vaccine and so forth. Right. Were you already on a first name basis with Mark Zuckerberg on February 27th? You know, a lot of people call me Tony who have never even met me before. Have you met him before this email was sent? I don't recall when the first time I met him. Now, okay, leave that up on the screen for a second. February 27th, 2020. He's getting an email from Mark Zuckerberg saying, glad for your statement about the COVID-19 vaccine. What COVID-19 vaccine existed in February 2020? We had not been sent into lockdowns. We didn't know that coronavirus would even spread from Asia to Western countries. What did he have to say about the COVID vaccine in 2020? We didn't even know that it was possible at this point. This is not followed up on, and this is my response to that.
When did Operation Warp Speed even start?
End of 2020, December 2020. Yeah.
That's when it started? Operation Warp Speed started in December? I think it started earlier.
Well, that's when vaccines were delivered.
Right. But when did it start?
I don't think that we even had an idea of a vaccine at this point because we didn't know we would go into lockdowns.
The first news report of Operation Warp Speed started on April 29th. 2020.
So what does Mark Zuckerberg know about this that we don't know? Right.
Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook has a communication with Dr. Fauci about a statement with Tony. What was the statement from Fauci on vaccines in 2020? In February of 2020. I was encouraged by your statements on vaccines in 2020. Like, what?
I have no idea why this was not followed up on, given that it was such a long, like, this email was sent here. What did you know at the time? And that one just is laid out there like, hey, Tony, thanks for information about the vaccine. That does not exist yet. That's incredibly suspicious. Zuckerberg later sends an email saying that he'll be giving the U.S. government lots of free money and ad space. He says, this is the next paragraph. This email was from Mark Zuckerberg. Finally, we have allocated technical resources and millions of dollars of free ad credits for the U.S. government to use for the PSAs to get its message out of the platform. And Dr. Fauci says, that's right. And the questioner says, that refers to Facebook? I guess so. Did you accept that offer that Facebook will donate millions of dollars of free ad credit? No, I don't have the authority to accept outside money like that. It would have to go through another channel. Okay, we know that. We know Facebook and Twitter had allocated a lot of free advertising and also accepted a lot of paid advertising for the COVID vaccine. Now, he mentions many times bringing in emails, wanting to bring in the WHO, the World Health Organization. He says we should bring them in on this. We need to push them on this. When the questionnaire, and I apologize, I had to screenshot this because it's 2 different documents on a PDF. says, do you recall any discussion of pressuring anybody in the WHO? And he says, I don't have any inkling at all of pressuring them. The only thing that's clear from the emails and my recollection is that everyone wanted that WHO to get involved because of their convening power and their credibility. We all wanted to make this an open discussion, and the WHO was the most appropriate forum for an open discussion. So I don't think a belief had anything to do with pressuring the WHO, merely to get them to meet. And then he says to the court reporter, you're sniffling. Do you have a cold? Do you want a vaccine? He did not say that, but I found it kind of a funny little aside.
Speaking of vaccines, I did find, so he did an interview with Face the Nation in February of 2020, February 16th of 2020, and where it was Margaret Brennan had asked him specifically about the vaccine at that time. February of 2020. You said recently, Dr. Fauci, that you could have some kind of vaccine within a year or so. Right. He said, well, first of all, Margaret, that 1 year timeline would be the world's indoor record of ever getting a vaccine out, at least to be able to early deploy something. You can't do any better than that. If you go any faster, you'll be cutting dangerous corners.
Oh, that's so interesting.
If you go any faster than that, you'll be cutting some dangerous corners.
And yet 10 months later, it was delivered.
Right.
It was shipped.
So that's, I guess, what Mark Zuckerberg was saying, I guess.
Thanks for your statement about it. I don't think that doesn't make sense.
I'm just giving you the timeline here. When was that email?
February of, I don't see the date. Let me go back. 27th, February 27th.
Okay. So this is a transcript from the 16th of February, 2020 from Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
But he's saying, what you're saying right now is that he was saying, I don't think we can move that fast, but we're going to try.
Yeah.
So what did he tell Mark Zuckerberg then? I'm interested in that. He does now say, regarding masks, people are picking up on this a lot. There's an email that they presented him from a friend who said, I'm going on a trip. Should I wear a mask? And he does say masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. The typical mask you buy at the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, which is small enough to pass through material. It might, however, provide some slight benefit in keeping out gross droplets of someone if someone coughs or sneezes on you. I do not recommend you wearing a mask, especially because you're going to this low risk place. Now then, they push him on the fact that what made you change your mind about this? Why, what's the data? He says between that time, that email in February of 2020, and then later in April when you're pushing this out, the questionnaire is how many studies were done between February of 2020 when you sent that email to when you changed your mind? And he says, did you have all these studies when you changed your mind on April 3rd? And he's like, yeah. And he says, well, what are they? And he says, I could find those and get them for you. I don't know, which is kind of interesting because if you're asking an entire population to change your behavior and wear masks, you would think you would have that. You would think his data for mask wearing, given how much he's pushed on it, would be at the tip, the tip of his tongue.
Right.
Be committed to memory in some way, shape, or form.
You would think, right? Considering how often he is known as the person who made us wear masks and put us in lockdowns. That's kind of germane to the job, like all these talking points.
You've heard him say that. No, he's not. He did not call for lockdowns. He did not. I want to be very clear about that. He told us, even though we have the tape and we've played it back. So maybe he literally.
I heard the opposite.
Yeah, he's completely gone the opposite direction now.
Yeah. He continuously talks about now. Let's just go back to the intention of this lawsuit. Is Dr. Fauci collude with social media in order to prevent people speaking and asking questions about the pandemic, namely lockdowns, mask rules, the vaccine, and alternate treatments? He continues to say, I don't have contacts there. I never worked with them. When press people asked me what to say, I would tell them, but I did not work directly with any of these social media. And they don't show him any emails or correspondence to prove otherwise, like the text that we have from Ursula von der Leyen. There's nothing like that. A lot of it is about the things that he said publicly and then became enforced on social media. And they talk about it. Did you know that social media, and I'm not going to so a lot of those rules are still in place, unfortunately. So I can't tell you the things that are mentioned in this deposition. There's about 4 things here that I would love to go over, but there are still rules around me saying those things. So I will refrain. And he says many times, he didn't know, he didn't know, he didn't know. And he doesn't know how that works. And he does not know why it happened. They would ask him, did you know that Twitter had a ban then on these certain vaccine discussions? And he says, like, I heard it in the hallway kind of thing. Not that he had any involvement or say in these things at all, because he continues to sort of present himself as a Luddite. That's what we get from that. That's not to say that there aren't very serious questions in here when he talks about gain of function, when he talks about lab leaks, when he talks about what, for instance, some of the alternative drugs that are on the market right now that we can't say. He says, I didn't like that because I didn't think there was enough studies on those things. And the questioner says, but there were some studies that showed that these alternative drugs were effective. And he says they were too small and they weren't long enough, which is interesting because then I would like to ask him, but what about the COVID vaccines? Because those didn't have long enough studies. No. Yeah. Some of them have had none at all. So why were you interested in saying these studies are insufficient, but no studies for the COVID vaccine are sufficient?
Right.
That makes no sense.
And data saying the ones that they said didn't worked and the ones they said didn't. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And he's pushed on that. And he's saying not all doctors agree with you. A lot of doctors actually feel that these things are effective. And he's like, meh. I'm the main doctor here.
I'm science.
Not everybody,
I'm science.
Yeah, not all doctors agree on anything, so that's kind of it. He wasn't questioned by a journalist, so I can't. He's questioned by a lawyer, and the lawyer is looking for things that they can nail, right? I, as a journalist, I'm like, can you follow up on this or that or this? So there's a lot of leaks there, there's a lot of question marks there, but those are the main takeaways.
So we'll see more, and if his daughter gets now pulled in for a deposition on this, and we'll see where this goes from here, because this was just one piece of it. Jen Psaki is also going to be a part of this. She openly spoke from the podium talking about here's what the White House would do specifically to reach out to Facebook, to reach out to Twitter, to get certain content censored. And of course, now we have the Twitter files. So we have both their side of it, and we also have the emails now from the Twitter files. I wonder how much of the Twitter files will help this investigation, this collusion investigation. As they go through that, they're able to pull all these pieces together now. Because normally you'd have to wait through for discovery. But now, like, Elon's just like releasing them. He's like, we don't need discovery. Like,
I have them.
Here,
I
see
bought
all
them.
of them. Here's all of them. I paid for these. Take a look at them. So interesting. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at Redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to Redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.